Welcome back to another episode of the Lender Podcast. Today, I am very excited because we have a special guest, Mr. Owen Dashner from Liquid Lending Solutions. And before we get started, I'll have you introduce yourself. But I just got to say, I love this community. It is so great. I like Owen and I, for example, we met on a random thread in Reddit, and since then we've hopped on a couple of different calls, and he's taught me lots of things and given me lots of tips and tricks. So I just gotta say, Owen is the literal goat. I know that I'm showing a little bit of my millennial side there, but Owen is the man. So I'm very excited to hop on this call with him, and hopefully he can impart some wisdom just like he has for me. So Owen, go ahead and give your spiel and your brief interview and kind of introduce yourself to everyone.
Yeah, well, I feel like I'm setting the listeners up for disappointment with that. I appreciate the kind words. No, it's been interesting exploring the world of Reddit, and this has been kind of a cool outcome of going into social media like information type platform like Reddit is. So this has been kind of fun getting to know you a little bit. And I'll just try and keep this high level at first here. If we have more questions, feel free to fire away. But I started out in real estate investing in 2005, and I was working a W-2 gig as like I was in corporate recruiting and HR, and I had done that career. By the time I ended up leaving that to go full time into real estate, I had been in it for about 20 years. Slowly started getting more and more burned out on my satisfaction with my job and lack thereof, and just wanted something more. So real estate was kind of just something I was fascinated with. I love the idea of creating time freedom, financial freedom through just basically side hustling into legitimate business. And so in 2005, I bought my first flip. And when I first started out, I was trying to figure out, with all the dozens of ways that you can approach real estate investing and kind of this space. I knew one thing: I didn't have much money. I knew another thing, which was I wanted to get to a point where I had enough cash flowing, either real estate or businesses, to where I could afford to walk away from my job. And I had a six-figure job. And again, I'm old, so this is like several years ago, where 100 grand was a lot more money than it is now. It seems like everybody needs to make $100,000 just to afford an apartment anymore. But I started that process, flipped a house, bought a rental, flipped a house, bought another rental, and just kind of rinse and repeat. And started out in the single family housing space, both, like I mentioned, the transactional side of real estate. So buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. That led to accumulating some, kind of a small portfolio of single family rentals. And then eventually I ended up, and I was still self-managing those, and had a, pretty stressful job and a lot of hours, and I had a new children on the way, so there was a lot of that stuff going on in the background. Kind of got to a point where I started getting a little bit bigger properties, so I dipped my toe into the multifamily space in about 2014. Then ended up buying whenever I could and could afford it. I would buy a little bit larger stuff, and I would just kind of start accumulating small multifamily assets. After a while, that grew over time as values kind of went up with the market and inflation. I was able to harvest some equity and plow that into larger deals. I had a couple where I got a pretty decent chunk of money from stuff that I had equity in, and I was like, I don't really have anything to do with this per se right now. Like, I don't have a property that I can just plug this into or 1031 exchange it into something else. So I was talking to my flipping business partner, Brandon, and we were kind of both like, hey, what about hard money? Like, I've heard a lot of people can do very well in that space. The returns are really good. We know real estate. This seems like it might be a good fit. So we started exploring that. This probably would have been, I'm going to guess, 2018, 19, probably 2018. And so Brandon and I started looking into that, and we heard like two or three fast no's from banks that we were working with on, just our real estate operations. And they were basically like, no, because we don't really understand how, this is the bank's feedback, we don't really understand how we can get security on the loans that you're making to other people. They just didn't understand how to collateralize the debt. So we just I gave up a little bit, or just kind of put a pin in that idea of starting a hard money lending operation or small business. And then fast forward a little bit into really the beginning of 2020. I have a good friend and now business partner, and we've been in several real estate deals together. His name's Colin Schwartz. we would have lunch. He's a real, motivational guy. We would, challenge each other on different, different personal and professional goals. And we would have lunch and just, throw out ideas and what's problems we're having with our business or businesses, and give advice and all that kind of stuff. And happened to call him one day. I was like, "What are you doing for lunch?" He's like, "Oh, actually, I'm just getting ready to start a meeting, but you can join if you want." I'm like, "Oh, what are we talking about?" And he's like, "Hard money." And I'm like, "Okay." Matter of fact, I may have some ideas there. So I grabbed some lunch, took it to the office, and then that meeting went really well. He was meeting with one guy that ended up being one of our business partners. And then I called my business partner in our flipping business. He called his other partner. So we ended up having five of us to start with. We each kicked in the equivalent of, well, we started with five people. There was, 100% for the number of shares. Brandon and I ended up buying in for, I think, 25%. And then the other three partners split the remaining 50. So we started with $1 million of our own money. And then that's kind of what the origin story was. And then we started growing into where we are now, which we can get into that along the way if you'd like, or I can give an overview of that too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We've got a lot to unpack there first. So I've got some questions right off the bat. So first and foremost, going all the way back, it sounds like you bought a flip first rather than, the natural progression is you get started with the rentals and then you do the flips and then you kind of move into like some development, like that natural progression that is most common with everyone getting into real estate. But it sounds like you just dove right into the flips before you even bought rentals. So I'm curious if that was intentional, if that was kind of your thought process behind
Okay,
it.
okay. You're a lot younger than I am, so I want to timestamp this for you in that Facebook was not in existence. I don't think YouTube was around, and if it was just in its infancy. Literally all I had to go off of was books. There was no bigger pockets. None of the stuff that's like super easy to digest and get whatever you want online right now. I'm like thumbing through paperbacks that were published in like 1965. So I'm learning all this stuff, right, on how to how to make this work. Like, what do I do? I know that I know what I want, kind of, but I don't know what the path is to get there. So I just read a lot of books, and I didn't really understand what it meant to like do it's thrown around a lot now, the Burr method. So you buy a property, you rehab it, you rent it, you refinance, and you repeat. So Burr is the commonly known term now, coined by Brandon Turner on Bigger Pocket. So I did some of that, but there was no name for it at the time. It was just you bought a property, you put money into it, you refinanced, got your money back, rented it out, did the next one. So I did a lot of that before I just didn't know what it was called. But along the way, I also built flip houses because I liked the chunks of cash that come along the way. So then I could take that money and either pay down debt, which I didn't do a lot of that. But I ended up just kind of putting it on overdrive and buying as many things as I could that made sense, and trying to basically kind of mix in flip here and there with my rental portfolio. That's kind of how I did it.
And then it sounds like as you were starting to gain some equity and you heard more about this like hard money thing, it sounds like you dove into it a little bit, but then you kind of got stuck because you got some no's from the banks, and
Mhm.
then you kind of went back to what you were doing before. And then when you had that sit down lunch meeting with all these guys, that's when you kind of got back into it. What happened between that time period where you're like, I don't know if I can do this, to actually getting started? Like, how long of a time period was that? And what were you doing in between there?
So, just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, the question is, how long did it take me from that sit down meeting that I had with Colin and the other guys to the point where we actually had a viable business? Is that kind of the
Correct. Yeah. Or no, sorry. It sounds like you were you had heard about hard money, you wanted to do it, you talked to different banks and they all said no. And then it sounds like there was kind of like a lull there before you met with Colin in the sit down, or
Yep.
maybe I have my timeline wrong.
No, you're right.
Okay. So during that lull, that time frame, is it kind of just like where you're like, I don't know if we can do this, so you kind of like gave up and just put a pin in it for that time being, or what happened between that time period?
Yeah, I think more of the latter. We basically were like, oh, let's look into this, and then we kind of got some initial like fast no's, and we're kind of like, all right, whatever. We'll just keep doing our thing with buying flip houses and rentals, and then just kind of like keep our nose to the grindstone in that space, and with the option of, like, hey, let's revisit this, if we find a bank that's willing to play ball with us, or we network with more people. And so I think it was just, we kind of tabled it for a bit, and then before we got introduced, I think, to the right people, with, my friend Colin and Chris, and then another partner that we ended up buying out, and then Brandon. So there were initially five, now there's four of us. But yeah, we just couldn't get any quick wins or initial traction with banks, and so we just kind of like stopped pursuing it. So we kind of hit the unpause button after my lunch meeting there, that impromptu lunch.
Okay. And then the other thing I was going to ask is, I know property values are lower than they are here in Idaho, for example. So how far did that first $1 million go? Did you have two loans and you were out, or were you able to churn it and do 10, 12 at a time?
Well, quick funny story on that. Our very first loan was for $1 million. So it lasted exactly one loan.
It went real
But
quick.
yeah, but this is actually a funny story. So we have a good friend that we've gotten to know through real estate, and going to meetups and REIAs and all that. And I went to Bigger Pockets with him, and just good dude. Like, we have a track record. I know he knows what he's doing. Our first loan was for a double closing on an apartment complex that he was doing a double close wholesale on. So he was buying it for $1 million, and then he ended up turning around and selling it for, I don't know, like 1.1 or 1.2 or something like that. And it was supposed to be on the same day, because that's the double closing. For those not all that familiar, it's basically when a wholesale, as traditionally known, as when you're assigning a contract. So you get a property under contract for 100 grand, you're going to assign that deal to somebody else for your fee, which could be 10,000 bucks, let's say. So you have the A to B transactions, 100 grand. That money goes in, and then it gets paid off when the B to C side of the transaction, which is the end buyer, comes in. So they bring in the 110 grand. You collect your 10. The 100 goes back to the original lender. Basically, we function as a conduit for a wholesale transaction on a multifamily deal. It was supposed to be that we got the money back the same day, and we were all kind of stressed. I'm not going to lie, because it was like,
I
well,
bet.
there's all our money, and it's all our own money, and it
A
goes out the
small loan of
door.
$1 million. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, long story short, what ended up happening was the end buyer of that deal, like, never showed up for closing. Like, he was just gone. The guy that we were dealing with couldn't get a hold of him, and we're like, what is going on? So our money went in. The property, we made the loan on the property, but there's no end buyer. There was some moments of panic, and trying to figure out what we do, and everything. And clearly, this is not the right way to start out, is my message here. But we ended up, the borrower that we had, that we lent the $1 million to. He's a solid operator, and he called me and he'd explained the situation. And I remember saying this because I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to explain this to the four other partners on what's going on. And I just said to him, I'm like, Dave, I'm confident that you're gonna figure this out. And I just left it at that. And then he called me like an hour later, and he ended up like pulling a bunch of money out of a line of credit that he had, like, to pay off the difference between the two loans or whatever. And we got paid back. And I think the wire ended up coming in the next day, but it was all, it was a happy ending, I guess, but there was a lot of stress involved.
Wow. Yeah, I
Yeah.
bet. And I'm sure in your mind you're like, okay, please don't screw me over. Please don't screw me over.
Yeah. 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 Please be the guy that I think you are. You send your son off to college or whatever, and that's kind of what it's like. You're like,
Right, right.
right, please don't embarrass
I
me.
know your character now. Please uphold it. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So that was loan number one. So immediately out of money, and then but it came back in really quickly, obviously, with double
And
closings.
do you remember how much you made on that transaction?
Yes, I do, because I get reminded of it all the time by my partners. We made like $1,500. So if you get anybody catching this episode, just learn from my mistakes in the beginning here, because do not do $1 million loan to make 1,500 bucks. Just
Don't do that.
don't
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
Uh,
Good
so
call.
that was
Good
a
call.
quick lesson learned on doing double closing, how the mechanics of that work, and what to properly charge that. That was not the right amount.
Oh, geez. I
Yeah,
love that.
good time.
Okay, so where after that you got your you dove right in. You didn't even dip your toes in. You dove right in. What happened after that?
Yeah, so okay, here's and I think we're going to talk maybe a little bit about this, but I think there's a cheat code for hitting the ground running on this. And that is you need to have people in the business, whether directly in it as a partner or they're in it as either an employee or a consultant or whatever. You need to have people that are familiar with real estate. And what I mean by that is you would think, duh, of course, you need to have people that are familiar with real estate. But when you're starting a hard money lending business, there's lending and then there's understanding the asset class itself, which if you only have a background in say like commercial lending or some other type of loan officer type of a job, you may not understand what the market is doing from a like single family housing perspective, or you may not understand how to get accurate comparable sales from certain parts of town or maybe a different market than you're in, right? So you need to be nimble and be able to like have a really solid if it's not you, then a partner or somebody in your circle there in the business that can help fill in the blanks from understanding what you're lending on. And also, so here's when I look at our business now, I look back and say, okay, what did we do right? And I think the things that we did right were we had partners that were all directly investing in real estate, had a long track record of, dozens and dozens and maybe hundreds of transactions, understands transactional real estate, understands different asset classes within. So not just like single family, it's single family, multifamily, maybe it's land development, kind of different flavors of that. But even more important than that, if you really want to grow a business like a hard money company, certainly you can just loan your own capital. That's totally fine if you want to make a good interest return on money that you have parked in a high yield savings account or even a regular savings account, right? So you can make great interest on it, but you're going to probably be tapped out pretty quickly unless you have like an extreme amount of personal wealth. Because, like I said, $1 million can go really fast, especially if you're in a high cost of living area like you live in. You could do a few more deals in Omaha, Nebraska than you can in your neck of the woods. But
Yep.
I think the key to this is the ability to raise capital from private investors and or family offices, institutional investors. That skill and that ability to grow your reserves and your capital stack by adding money from private individuals is the lifeblood of growth in a hard money lending business. Period.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I was just gonna say too, like that's selfishly, I've really enjoyed chatting with you because that's what we're struggling with too. It's just like constraints on capital. And so when you said you got a lot of no's from banks, I resonate with that wholeheartedly because I've probably gotten a dozen no's, and just in the last week alone. So what advice would you give? Where considering where you're at now, when you were getting started, what would you do differently? Would you target family offices? Would you go friends and family? Would you look for lines of credit? Like what's kind of been your secret sauce to raising capital?
Yeah, no, I mean it's a great question, and there's different ways that you can go about putting this business together, and there's different ways to operate it, right? So I think when you're looking at the money raising aspect of it, whether it's from private individuals, like you've got Wall Street, you've got family office, you've got different sources like that. The low hanging fruit is going to be friends and family. So if you want to raise money, like let's say your parents or you have family members that maybe have they're obviously older than you, so they have probably been working for a while. Hopefully they've done a good job at saving some capital. People like that have reserves of cash that they don't know what to do with. Maybe they're scared of the stock market, but they know you, like you, and trust you. And they say, I know I know you know what you're doing. I know understand the real estate space. What kind of interest return can I get on this? And basically you're taking money from somebody that's trusting you with it, and you're putting it out into a higher yielding return, and you're taking the spread. That's essentially what you're doing here. I think in the beginning, that is like I mentioned, the low hanging fruit. It's the easiest way to start adding capital, available capital to your lending base. The harder, or I guess step two maybe, would be getting your legs under you in the business so that you can actually go out and tell your story when you're pitching it to a commercial bank. So if you want to go out and get a line of credit, if you don't have a tax return yet, like if you're just like, hey, good news, commercial lender, I'm starting a hard money lending business this week, they're going to be like, that's
Yeah,
cute.
get
Like,
lost. Yeah.
where's your financials? What's your return? Like background. So I think when you're looking at like the step one, step two, step three, I think it's step one is friends and family for sure. Step two, you can start, dipping your toe in the commercial lending space. So there are banks out there, despite how many no's you hear, that are willing to play ball and provide a line of credit that you can then utilize to lend out again. And we can talk about how the mechanics of that works with a bank in a bit if you like. And then the kind of third leg of this is once you start getting more experience in raising that capital, you can look at you could do a 506c syndication and start a fund. And then in the fund, then you're basically pooling investor capital from, and I'm not a disclaimer here, I'm not a CPA, I'm not an attorney, I'm not an SEC, person. Basically, don't listen to me. But when you start a fund, you can basically pool capital from a bunch of people, and they don't necessarily have to be people right? So you'll have to contact an SEC attorney to find out how the mechanics of that work, but that's essentially what you're doing. The SEC attorney is going to help you set up your framework for the fund. They'll have, kind of boilerplate stuff, but they'll go through and modify it for how you want your business set up. So when you start pooling capital from accredited investors that you may or may not know, then that's kind of like you're getting to the point where you're legit, not that you weren't before, but you're arriving into kind of a bigger pool to play in. Instead of being a big fish in a small pond, you might be a smaller fish in a larger pond, to coin a phrase. So, but yeah, I think those are kind of the legs of your growth journey in hard money. And then there's other kind of like joint venture type deals. You can work with brokers. You can do different things with collateralizing debt with borrower assets that maybe aren't real estate. You can start kind of exploring those things. So it's fun because there's so many different ways to do it. And if you have not me, but if you have smart people in your corner that you can roll these ideas off of, that's I think the cheat code to this. Um, if I could, Bryce, too, one thing I did want to mention that I left out in the beginning is we were talking about having a good solid base of real estate knowledge. We were talking about
Hmm.
having a good network of people that are in real estate that you can lean on and ask advice from and just know in general. But I think an even better approach to this, or to coincide with it, is make sure you're visible and an active participant in your local REIA, so your real estate investor association. Typically, any town of any size in the U.S. is going to have one. They'll have a local chapter, and if they don't have one, even better, start one. So if you start like a local meetup group, which one of my partner Colin that I mentioned, he started the Omaha Real Estate Meetup, and I think we have like, I don't know, it's like 7,000 members in the Omaha market here. So we know, and we have monthly meetings, and there's a guest speaker, and a whole bunch of networking, and that kind of thing. So having knowledge of not just the industry itself, but the players, right? So you start to get a good idea about who has a really good reputation, who does what they say they're going to do, who is, who's a scammer, who's somebody that's just trying to go out and, work you until they can get one over on you, that type of thing. You really really get a fast leg up on other people that are just like, oh hey, I'm starting a hard money lending business. What do I do now? And so having all of those things, and I know that's a lot. I'm throwing a lot out here, but I'm just looking at what I think made us successful quickly, and those are the key things that I think might separate you from another just also ran hard money lending business.
So if I were to ask you, let's say you go to these RIAs and you have these meetups. Would you recommend doing that from the get go, just starting out, even if you don't have a lot of capital, or do you feel like you should hold off a little bit before you kind of put your name out there? It's kind of like the chicken versus the egg thing. Like, what do you start with, and what's your
I
recommendation?
think absolutely you should start, even if you are just learning about real estate, go there, and that's when you start making relationships. So what I found when I first started out in real estate, I was really intimidated by talking to people that owned like a whole bunch of property, right? I was like, oh my God, they're gonna like they don't even want to talk to me. And you know how that like if somebody really inexperienced calls you on the phone, you can always tell. Like they're
You
either
know
like
right away.
reading
Yep.
a script or they're like nervously talking or like, they're trying to think about what to say next as opposed to listening to. You can always tell. But what I found is what actually happens is the people that have been doing this a long time, unless they're a total D bag, they're willing to help new investors. They want to help. They want to give advice. As long as you're not taking advantage of their time too much, they're happy to help. So I think if you're a new investor, if you don't have a lot of experience in the space, but I don't think you should wait to go out. It's the equivalent of saying you should wait to buy real estate when until interest rates go down. I think time in the market you know is more important. And it's the same thing with relationships, in my opinion. So the earlier you can start them, the stronger they become over time, and the more things that you can layer on top of them with getting referred to other people that are good. I think that's it. Yeah. So absolutely don't wait. I'm a big type A, love networking type guy. So I know it's not super comfortable for a lot of people, but my approach whenever I went to these, because they can be overwhelming. If you go to an event where there's 100 plus people there, or it could be smaller, bigger, whatever. It can be really intimidating. You're just overwhelmed, and I think that the natural tendency for somebody that maybe isn't a real type A outgoing person is like, I'm just going to watch the speaker and then I'm just going to bail. There's a little like do an Irish goodbye at the end of the event, and I think it's entirely the wrong approach. My goal whenever I started going to those things was I wanted to find 1 to 2 key people and have a really quality conversation with them so that they remembered me, I remembered them, and it wasn't just that cheesy exchanging, business cards thing and be like, oh, I'm a blah, blah, blah. What do you do? And you're just collecting stuff. Nobody cares about that. So I think you go there and you have a really meaningful conversation with somebody about your background, what you want, what you're interested in, and they're going to remember that. They'll be like, "Oh yeah, you're the guy that likes to buy single families that are by the lake and or whatever the zip code is or whatever." You want to be that person, right? Be memorable. And to be memorable, you also have to be curious. So I like to find out about people and what makes them what's their operation like, what makes them tick. And the more curious you are about somebody, the more they like it just happens naturally. I think if you ask the good questions, people are going to be like, "Huh, that Bryce, good dude." You're just the one asking questions. They may leave the conversation and not know one thing about you, but they're going to remember the fact that you took interest in them long enough to find out everything that you're all about. And that's always been my approach. And it just comes back to you like in a waterfall. It's crazy.
Right. Well, and clearly, yeah, you've done that. You can tell that, yeah, you are good with networking, and it totally pays dividends. And one quick thing I was thinking about, I don't remember where I learned this from, but whenever I'm exchanging like contact information with somebody, somebody once shared this little tidbit with me, which has stuck forever and has been invaluable. And what they said was, rather than just like saying, "Hey, this is Bryce," when you text the person, give them some little like one liner, like, "Hey, this is Bryce, that creepy white dude with the weird mustache from the REIA," and like it gives you like a little chuckle, but it's that one thing that just sticks in their mind that they're never going to forget because, oh yeah, that dude with the weird mustache, like I'm always going to remember him. And that, for whatever reason, I don't know why that popped into my head, but that served me very well.
No, actually, that is a great point, and yeah, you want to be memorable, right? So people remember people that make them laugh, and if you're not like a naturally humorous person, like little things like you just said, don't take a whole lot of effort or whatever, but they make your memory like sticky in someone's head. So they're gonna remember over time. Oh yeah, you're that guy with the mustache. Nice stash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So another thing that I wanted to touch on, and we kind of diverted a little bit, but I have this personal belief, and you may disagree, but when it comes to raising capital, my personal belief is that there is enough capital in your immediate network and your second degree network, meaning people who they know. Do you agree with that, or is that just like a fallacy that I have made up in my own in my own head?
I think that is probably true. I think the older you get, the more depth your network has for capital, obviously, because they just have more time. But I think, yeah, if you get the ability to not ask for referrals or introductions in a cheesy way, like if you can do it in a way that makes sense. Hey, would you? And I always like the approach of not saying, "Can you refer me to them?" I like saying, "Can you introduce me to so and so?" And the more introductions like that you can get, the more your organic center of influence is gonna grow. But yeah, I think people overlook the power of their center of influence that they already have. They may say, "Well, I don't know any rich people." Well, yeah, maybe you don't directly, but I bet your mom does, your dad does, your uncle does. Everybody probably knows. Let's say it's an attorney or a lender or just somebody that owns a business. Those are the people that are going to have a network of stuff that can help. Business owners, they're a gold mine. Every business owner out there has worn multiple hats, right? They're in the same boat as you are right now, is trying to start hard money. Not you personally, but somebody trying to start a new business. They've been through that already. So if you're like, I would love to buy you a cup of coffee. I promise I'm gonna be respectful of your time. I would love to find out more about how I can hit the ground running. And those are kind of things people like to help people like that. If you're not going to dominate their time and take 2 hours and bug them to death with picking their brain, and I hate that term anyway, but those are great conversations to have. And one thing I used to do too, Bryce, is I had a Calendly link where I would offer up once a week. I made it available to everybody in our real estate network, and we have two Facebook groups, one for the Omaha REIA, one for the Omaha Real Estate Meetup. And I just said I'm willing to have coffee with anybody that is willing to or that wants to talk about real estate or learn about real estate. And it was like full. My calendar once a week was full in that time spot for as long as I had it open. It filled up in like 20 minutes.
Was this a one-on-one, or was it like a one-to-many like group
Yeah, it was a
scenario?
one-on-one coffee, and that was my deal. So
Mm.
I'd be at the same time on Tuesday, every Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock. I'm there for a networking meeting, and I got crap from people who were like, "Oh, how many coffees have you had this week or whatever?" But guess what? I mean, I had probably 200 coffees over the last, I don't know, 6, 7 years, where now I have a personal relationship with that person that I had, coffee or lunch with, right? And I know that I can text them and just say, hey, I'm running into a jam in this, and do you know anybody that does this? And you can get referred that way. I'm just saying there's networking, and then there's quality networking, and then there's networking that you really give back to the people that are trying to start out, or maybe they're more experienced, and you can just give them a different perspective. So I think I didn't expect anything out of that. I just found out I was getting asked a lot of the same questions by all, different people. And so I thought, you know what? I think it's more impactful when you sit down across from somebody and ask that stuff face to face, rather than just, trying to do it on a webinar or something like that.
Right. Well, and two, then it becomes more organic, right? It like just like you said, like who, how did you word it? You said don't give me a referral. Who can you introduce me to? It's more organic. It feels less salesy and transactional. It's just normal. It's just like don't be a freaking robot. And that makes all the difference. Yeah. So I was going to ask you, out of all of these RIA meetings and one-on-one coffee chats that you've had, how many of those have either turned into investors who have brought capital, or borrowers that you've actually lent to?
That is a good question. I would say by far more borrowers, like tons of borrowers out of those meetings, tons. And when you can do small group meetings too, those are also good. Those are actually probably my favorite. You get a lot of bang for your buck. And then you just talk about your business, what you charge, how it all works, and then people will come to you after a while. And when you're a real estate investor and you're looking for a lender and you want to grow and flip more houses or buy more rental properties or whatever, you want to get referred to other hard money options or private money options. So I think getting referrals happens like grassroots really quickly. I think if somebody finds out that you're making loans and you were easy to work with, and there wasn't a lot of red tape, that's what everybody wants. So yeah, I think I don't know. I like that approach, but yeah, I think we definitely have had people reach out. I would say it's more typical for borrowers to approach you at those type of meetings. Like let's say you're at a REIA or a meetup or whatever. It's more common for borrowers to approach you if you're starting a hard money lending business, or they think you might be, than it is for people that want to come over and invest 500 grand with you or 100,000 or whatever, right? But those are follow-ups afterwards. And so one thing I would also recommend is like you want to make sure and have like a good real estate or your experience bio, so almost kind of like a resume, but target it or like kind of tailor it for the lending and real estate industry. And if you actually have a legit business and you're starting a fund, then put together like a slide deck or something like that that's pretty spiffy, and it tells kind of like your story in a succinct way, but it also will give them good information on what kind of returns they can expect. Of course, just do that if work within the SEC guidelines of that as an offering. But that's what we do. So we have a lender slash investor slide deck that we'll send to people. And I think you and I talked about that offline a couple weeks ago. But we found that's really helpful. And then you'll get lenders that, or you'll get private money people that'll come to you and they'll be like, hey, what can I get for, I have like $150,000. Like, what kind of interest rate return can I get for that? And then you can walk them through the process. You'll get people that are I guess not comfortable or like they just don't understand how it all works. And they'll say, well, and you and I discussed this too, I believe, but you'll have some hard money lenders that will make loans with investor capital that's tied to a specific property, or there's the approach where you just have a pool of money and you make loans out of that pool into a whole bunch of different assets. And that's there's no really wrong way, but there's just different ways to approach it. So you can peg it to a specific investment, or you can just leave it in a pool of other investors. But I really think having it's a more compelling story when you could say, look, I have my own money in this. I have my friends and family money into this deal. My background is in real estate, and here's why this is going to work. I have a network of these people. These are the types of loans we're doing. I know this market cold. Those are the types of things that somebody that's got money wants to know. They want to know you know what you're doing and that you're going to be a good steward of their capital if they lend it to you. And they also want to understand, okay, what is the risk of this and what can I expect for a return out of it? And what we found is people ask a lot of questions on the upfront, and then when they decide they like you and you know what you're doing, you'll never hear from them. Like, yeah, they love the monthly interest, and unless they want to pull the money out and put it into like another deal or a business, like they love it. They love the monthly returns. They're not exposed to all the wild swings of the stock market. It's a pretty decent return that we offer comparatively to a bank, and a lot of people are happy with it. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting you say that because I've noticed the exact same thing. Like they will grill you like incessantly with questions and like, so we've set up a fund. You know, we've got our PPM, private placement memorandum, and we were working with a prospective investor lately, and she like I kid you not, it was probably like a 6-page email with like question after question after question. And anyway, like we just went through like this is what we do, this is how we do it. These are the risks. There are risks, but you know this is our default rate. This is how we secure your interest and your collateral. And she's like, oh, okay, and that's it. And she's been like you said, just like crickets ever since. So it's been really great.
Yeah, I think it's funny too when you because there's wildly different personality types out there, right? You'll have some people, not to stereotype, but a lot of engineers and people that are more on the technology or engineering side of the personality type scale. They're going to ask a lot of questions. They want to know, they want certainty. And if you're dealing with somebody that's just like not to stereotype again, but like a salesperson is typically going to be really type A. They're just like, I just want it done. Don't worry about the details. They may have some questions up front, but once they feel like you're a solid person and you have at least the basics answered on how you're going to protect their money and give them a return, they're like, okay, I'm good. And it's just funny to me the different personality types because you get raked over the coals with some people that are like super detailed and others are just like, yeah, whatever, man, I like you, here you go.
Yeah, you're good. Just give me a paycheck.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
good.
yeah.
The other thing that I thought was really interesting was before I was a lender, I assumed that all these, for example, we did probably 75 fix and flips ourselves before we got into lending. And so we were very familiar with borrowing funds from hard money lenders, less informed on what was happening behind the scenes. And once I got into it, I had this idea, this mentality that like I was going to have like 5 whale investors, and they were all going to bring like 7 figures in capital, and then it would be pretty easy and done. But that has not been our experience. I was chatting with a lady the other day who had a $50 million fund, and I asked her how she raised the capital. Similar questions to you, and she said $100,000 at a time. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. She's like 50,000, 25,000, 100,000 here. And they've been very successful, but that was just an interesting shift in my mind. Just, I was thinking, maybe if I could get someone with 1, 2, even $3 million, this would be great. But that hasn't been my case. I don't know if that's the same with
No,
you.
I 100% agree with you, and I've had similar experiences with that. Now we have had investors that have had like a larger chunk of capital, like so maybe they have $1 million or 2 or 3 million or whatever, and they need to temporarily park it somewhere where they're not losing, time value of money by having it sitting in a, interest bearing account in a bank, but that they're going to get not much in the way of a return. They're like, hey, I need this parked for like a year. What kind of return can I get? And then you can, depending on how much it is and what your business model is, you just give them a good return for it. And a lot of them that they like that. But yeah, I think we have a lot more $100,000 investors than we do the larger ones. But it all adds up. Like the cumulative effect of that over time is just staggering. I mean, our business has like doubled every year, if not more, since we started. Granted, it was just 2020 when we started, but it's been crazy the growth we've had. Now, one thing I wanted to mention too, and I think I skipped over this part. We were talking about partners earlier, and the kind of like what makes a good hard money lending foundation for the people and knowledge base. And one thing I feel like that gave us a real quick leg up is two of my partners, Colin and Chris, they own basically a syndication business. So they're very experienced in raising capital. They've got a fund created, and these are typically multifamily operators. So they'll raise money for multifamily deals from investors. They put it into that deal, and then they'll operate the asset and then either refinance or just hang on to it or whatever. So having somebody that already has that type of background makes it so much easier to raise capital because they're already out there doing it anyway.
They're already in the
It gives
weeds. Yeah.
people a nice option rather than, do you want to invest in this, yes or no? It's, would you rather invest in this or would you rather invest in our hard money fund? So here's the pros and cons. Here's the length of time where your money's going to be tied up. Here's the amount of returns that we're projecting, that kind of thing. So if you give somebody the choice of A or B or A, B or C, it's way more successful than it is if it's just you want this or not.
Yes
Yep.
or no.
But yeah, having partners or even yourself, if you're used to being out there and raising private capital from people, those people are going to be so much quicker growth if they started in a hard money, lending business than somebody that's just starting out and they don't really know anybody or don't have much of a real estate background. So and if you look at everything that we've talked about so far and you say, okay, I want to do a personal inventory, and I think everybody should do a personal inventory of your skills and experience and what you bring to the table and be brutally honest with yourself. If you have a skills inventory and you make some bullet points and be like, okay, you know, 5 years of experience in real estate, or I know a lot of investors, or I have a rich uncle that's interested in giving me some money, or something like that. Make a list of that, and then you're going to need to fill in the gaps. And those gaps can either be filled through people, or learning yourself, or doing things that are going to get you more experience in those, right? So you have to find either people or do the experience yourself if you want to grow. And I think people is the fastest way. There's already people out there that are doing things that you're probably never going to be as skilled as they are because you won't catch up in the amount of time they've been doing it. So I think that's the best way to do it. Partnering is not for everybody, but I think it's the best way to approach this because you can't do it all. You're going to be bogged down. If you're starting a hard money lending business, you have to find borrowers, you have to vet deals, you have to run comps, you have to do the paperwork, you have to, raise money. You have to understand and know a lot of things. And if you're trying to do all that with one hat on, I mean, you're going to struggle.
Yeah. It's a lot more than just like underwriting a deal and wiring some funds. There's a lot more that goes into it. And obviously it helps having the real estate background. And I would say that's almost a necessary thing. Like if you haven't, been doing flips or running comps numbers 100 times every single day, you and I are to a point where we can look at a deal and know within 10 seconds if it makes sense or not. Like it's easy. It's the back of your hand. And that is so important when you're doing this because you've got your own capital on the line, you've got investor capital on the line. And that's a big deal. That's a huge deal.
I tell this we've I would say, well, I don't know what the percentage is. I could probably look this up, but you look at if somebody brings you a hard money loan request and you look at the underwriting in it and you say, this doesn't, you shouldn't do this. Like this doesn't make sense. And I mean, we're not going to do the loan. And if we don't do the loan, then you probably shouldn't.
It's not a good deal. Yeah.
'Cause we're underwriting like we're going to be the ones buying it. And if we think that there's a high likelihood of success based on the business plan for that asset or that the loan that we're lending, then we'll do it. But otherwise, it's like I think people just miss a lot of stuff. Or we'll look at a rehab budget and we'll be like, okay, so you're gonna do a complete house remodel for 25 grand. You're gonna do kitchen, multiple bathrooms, siding, windows, doors, roof, all that. We know, I mean, you can know within looking at that, it's not realistic. And they shouldn't do that. So I think you have stakeholders in the hard money space where it's like you have the owners, you have the investors, you have the bank, but you also have the borrowers. And those are your stakeholders, right? And I think if you educate and do right by your borrowers and not just say, I want to be a greedy lender and just I'll do all these loans, and if you go sideways on that, I'm going to take the property, like loan to own. If you're doing that, then I don't really have advice for you because that's not how you should be doing it. But if you really look at your borrower base as your asset, and it really is, then and treat it accordingly and educate them along the way. Like, here's why we didn't approve this. You should really think about not doing this, and here's why. And you paint that picture. I think that respect will go a long way. Now, are they going to go out and find another hard money lender that is going to fund the deal? Maybe. But guess what? They're probably going to get burned. And if they do get burned, they're going to come back and you'll be like, I should have listened to you. I want to do business because you have my best interest in mind. So I think it's credibility, 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 and that's how you do it. You do right by all of your stakeholders, and you treat your money like it's your own, even more so when it's investor money. And I think you're going to go a long way in it. And you'll get mad referrals out of this.
Right. Well, and what a great business model when your interest, your investor's interest, and your borrower's interest are all aligned. Like everybody makes money, and your borrowers are not just a points machine, that you're trying to churn through. Like if they lose money, you lose money more than likely. Like this is not. It's just, and it's your reputation on the line. Nobody wants to run a business like that where borrowers just leave and walk away with a bad taste in their mouth. Like our lender that we borrowed from consistently, he saved us probably on 3 or 4 different deals just because he's like, I wouldn't do this. And I was like, oh, wow, thank you. No, that was super beneficial. And we ended up walking away, and I know that we, save money in the long run. So yeah, 100%.
Well, I think just to finish the thought and kind of put a bow on that topic, I think it's the difference between you almost have a little bit of an adversarial relationship when you're dealing with a bank typically. So like you want a loan, their job is to give you loans, but they're going to make you jump through all these hoops, and it feels just so painful a lot of times. The red tape just makes it almost not worth it. Whereas if you're in a like collaborative relationship where, like you said, if your borrower wins, you win, and if you win, your investors win. And coming along for the ride is any bank that you're also utilizing, funds from. So it's a really a four-way win. Whereas if you're just dealing with a bank, it's just kind of an adversarial relationship, and it's I win, you lose, or some flavor of that. You know what I mean?
I love that. I want to ask, are you okay sharing numbers with about, your particular fund and the kind of the revenue numbers and things like that you're doing? And if not, that's totally
Sure.
okay.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
Okay. Yeah. I'd love to know, like, roughly, what your average fund size is, what your average deal size is, rough profits that you're making on individual loans, if you don't mind, because I think that would be really, really valuable to listeners.
So I think like to kind of give you a picture of the revenue growth that we've had. We when we started out in it was September of 2020, and we've yeah, it's been right at 4 years that we've been in business. We have, oh, let's see, I wish I would have had all this pulled up for you, but we have to date done roughly about 450 loans. So doing the math there, and we've kind of accelerated on the velocity of this in the last year, especially because we've had a lot more capital available. But we started out at $1 million for total, and our capital stack, for our lendable capital stack, and now we're roughly about 24 million. So through incrementally raising money from investors and leveraging our financial statement and our experience, we've been able to get a pretty good line of credit with a commercial bank. And we have about $6 million available for that. So lines of credit are nice because if typically you're borrowing money from just an investor, right? So they just want to make a simple return on their cash. They lend you 100 grand, you re-lend that out. You have to pay interest on that money the minute you take it from them. Whereas you may have the $100,000, you put it in, your business account, you're looking for a loan to deploy it to, you're still paying interest. Whereas if you have a backstop of it, like as your total capital stack, let's say I've got 24 million bucks, 6 million of that is a line of credit. That means that we can have $18 million that is investor money that we're paying out on every month, right? And that is the amount that we need to have deployed to make sure that we're covering our spread. So if we don't have 6 million of that loaned out, oh well, because we're not paying interest on it because it's a line of credit, right? So those are nice. If you can now friends and family money and going the syndication route, starting a fund, raising accredited investor dollars, that's all important, of course. But I think you have to marry that with a backstop of a nice line of credit once you get to that point with a bank. That helps out a lot. But I think when you look at kind of the blended, like every business is different. You're not going to run yours the same way as mine. You're not going to have the same people or backgrounds of people as we do. We have one employee, and she is the one who pulls comps for us. So anytime a loan request comes in, she looks at basically the scope of work, and we've got we have some different documents that borrowers fill out, but who's the borrower, what's their background, what loan are they requesting, how long do they want it out, all those things are important. But she is a licensed agent, so she can go out and pull comps. And she's very good. She's worked with us, Brandon and I, before we even started this business in our real estate investing. So having somebody that is reliable, that can pull accurate comps of after repair value, I think is really important too. So that's something we added a little bit later on. At first, we didn't really need employees, obviously. So I was kind of wearing a lot of hats for about the first 6 months. I kind of, I'm not taking credit for setting everything up, but I did a lot of the arms and legs work. I did a lot of the, day-to-day operations, dealing with borrowers, trying to raise capital, all that. And then now I don't really do a whole lot with the day-to-day. I still get a ton of people that reach out, and I try to steer them toward Angie whenever I can, our director of lending. But it's a lot more fun when you're not bogged down in all the like paperwork and details and all that. So I don't know if I answered your question. I kind of went off the rails there, but
No, no, that's beautiful. And how like how many outstanding loans do you typically have at any one time? I know you said $18 million ish is what you try to stick around, but like what does that look like as far as like individual
yeah,
loans?
I mean we're like with what we have to have out in order to like make sure all the investor capital is covered is about 18, but we typically run we're almost I don't know the percentages offhand, but we run out of money more often than we have money sitting. So it's a good problem to have, I realize, but we're loaned out. We need to raise more money, and then you'll have a big loan that'll pay off, and you're like, oh crap, what are we gonna do? It's like it's always that fine balance of like available capital versus good loans to put it into. But yeah, well, sorry, what was your question again on that part?
No, no, that was great. I was just going to say how like roughly how many loans does that look like? Or like 60,
We
40?
have typically between, I would say, 70 to 80 at this of right now at the capital stack that we have. And then some of those are a little bit larger loans, so a million plus, but a lot of them, kind of the bread and butter, is finding reliable operators that run consistent flipping or like rental, purchase, and rehab and refinance companies. So if you can find borrowers that are doing steady Eddie, they're doing a couple of deals a month or maybe more than that. Like we have different groups in different cities like Des Moines, Iowa, Kansas City, Missouri, Omaha. We have some towns that we really like where we found operators and got referred to really good ones where we don't have to underwrite every deal like with a microscope, right? Because they have a track record. They've done multiple deals with us, and we know that when they underwrite deals, we typically can trust them, but we'll validate. So it's like trust but validate.
Well, and think about those borrowers too. Like when working with a repeat borrower is so much easier, so much nicer. There's so much less paperwork and vetting and due diligence and background and everything that goes into vetting a borrower that I think that alone is will lift so much of the weight and the headache off your shoulders.
100% could not agree more. And it just, so I look at that as almost like, this sounds bad to say, but you know how like there's the subscription model of businesses where they'll sign you up and you're paying monthly regardless, like gym memberships. I mean, they're the best example of this. Well, 90% of the people that sign up for gym memberships never go back or go back once or something like that, some ridiculous stat. But like I look at I look at really good borrowers that are good operators and that do a lot of volume. I look at that as almost a subscription model. So your job then as the hard money lending business owner is you make sure they're happy. You make sure you're checking in on them. You make sure that relationship is solid, right? Because lending can be a commodity, but let's face it, this is very much a relationship business. And if you like working with a borrower, there's always going to be somebody that's probably going to try and undercut you. But that's why you need to go above and beyond on customer service. You need to make sure you get FaceTime with those people, even if they're in another market. So we'll either go to, Des Moines, Iowa, which is a couple hours away. Kansas City, Missouri is like 3 hours away. So like we'll go and we'll make sure we've got, we're listening to our borrowers, we're hearing what they're saying, and we're paying attention to what their needs are. I think when they feel heard, the loyalty of staying with you, even if you maybe have, let's a point or two difference in your interest rates.
A little more expensive.
And so I look at that as like that's your loyalty base, almost like a subscription type setup for your business. It's recurring revenue, and the more people you can find like that, it just makes your life so much easier as a lender. It's great loaning to new borrowers. Like they're just getting into real estate investing and they read Rich Dad Poor Dad for the first time and they're all like guns ablazing and they can't wait to scale up and buy 100 units and all that. They're fun to work with because they're so enthusiastic, but you don't want to build a business just loaning to first time borrowers because you're not going to do well. Uh,
Yeah, you'll lose your
you
shirt.
need to have your steady Eddie, your people that are going to continuously provide you with loan requests each month, and you have to foster those relationships. So I think doing that, sprinkling in kind of the newbie loans, making sure you're a lot more careful in underwriting those, and then looking at eventually when you get your legs under you in the business and you have like let's say you have more bigger loans that you're doing, then it gets kind of fun because then you can start networking with brokers and other like attorneys and stuff. Like we have our attorney brings us a lot of potential loans that normally we'd be like, no, thanks. Like what even is this? But we've done a couple of really, really good loans that were like, a couple $1 million that normally we would have just been like pass, hard pass. But we did research on it. So I think, when you look at this business too, like you have to have, depending on how big you want to go, I would really highly advocate for having a really kick-ass attorney in your corner on not just the SEC side, but really your day-to-day business stuff that can help you with documents, that can help you with legalities in different markets because every state is different in regards to what they allow and what they don't. So attorney, really good CPA, and not just a CPA that's going to do your tax prep, right? Not that person. You need somebody that's really good at
Someone who's
strategy.
well versed in lending. Yeah.
You need somebody that's really good at forecasting that can do you can see trends in your business and like gaps and what you're doing well, what you're not. So I think some of that helps with the not just the prep but the strategy and really overall strategic planning of your business is invaluable too. Somebody to run the day-to-day operations. So those kind of like main things, it's invaluable.
Go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Amazing. Oh, and I have about 10,000 additional questions I want to ask you. This is so good, but I also want to be very conscious of your time. So we're coming up on an hour here, so I want to let you go. But um, where can people find you? I want you to pitch your socials. I want people to be able to reach out to you, whether that's for actually getting a loan as a borrower, or I know you have your own podcast where you talk about a lot of this stuff. So where can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, so I have a podcast with my co-host Ted Kosh. Ted owns the Omaha REIA and really all the REIAs in Nebraska. So he has put together a fantastic group. They have if you're local to me, which probably most of you aren't, but they have a fantastic monthly meetup there. We have a weekly podcast called REIA Radio. So that's REIA, like Real Estate Investor Association, REIAradio.com, or you can find us on any of the socials, Spotify, Audible, whatever it is. That's a great place to reach out. We also I'm pretty active on, so my handle on Instagram is called Owen Money Real Estate, all one word. So my first name, Owen Money Real Estate. And yeah, you can reach out to me that way. I have my email address is owen@liquidlendingsolutions.com. Be happy to, if you want to find out more about our hard money lending business, that's great. If you want to just network and find out more about each other, I'm totally fine with that too. LinkedIn's another place, Owen Dashner. But yeah, that's kind of where to find me.
Amazing. Okay. And I don't want to, have your phone blow up, but Owen's always a great resource, and he's usually happy to take a call or just shoot the shit with. So hopefully that's okay
Oh
to
yeah,
throw
of
that
course,
out there.
man.
But
Yeah,
Owen's great. No, this has been invaluable, and Owen's a great resource to have in your back pocket. So Owen, thank you seriously so much. This has been awesome. Again, I would keep talking, but we better let people
well,
go.
hey,
So
maybe we'll do a part two sometime.
I would love that. Let's do that.
Awesome.
Let's do that. All right. Awesome. Thanks, Owen.
Thanks for
Appreciate
having
you
me.
so
Appreciate
much.
it, Bryce. You have a great day.
Yep.